Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar on inclusive STM meetings. I'm Sarah Phibbs, a consultant for equity and inclusion for STM, and I'm here to host our webinar for the day. I'm just going to turn on our closed captions. As we said, we'd do this as a good best practice. Right, hopefully that's working. Great, so this is the first time we're rolling out our inclusive STM meetings practice. We've got two of our task and finish group members here today to share the best practice guidelines with you. So we have Bill DeLuise from Wiley. Hi, Bill. And we have Demeter Snow from the American Society for Civil Engineers. Hi, Demeter. So we're recording today and we will take our questions at the end and we will stop recording to enable us to take questions. So I have to begin, as all STM meetings need to begin, with reading out the anti-competition statement. So STM is committed to complying with all applicable competition and antitrust laws. Webinar participants must refrain from disclosing or asking about competitively sensitive information and shall not solicit any agreement regarding any competitor's conduct in the marketplace. If a panelist or audience member believes any such information or agreement is being disclosed or sought, that individual should promptly interrupt to point out their objections and request that such activity be stopped and leave the webinar if it does not. Any such communication shall promptly be reported to STM staff. So, wanted to start by sharing some other work of STM's D&I Task and Finish group, which is our events code of conduct, which we've drafted to include not only the key aspects of what we consider to be the right kind of conduct for a meeting, to respect the perspectives of others, be courteous to others, and to avoid aggressive and or inappropriate behaviour. But we also have mapped out a complaints policy if people feel that anything has happened at an event that they feel they want to discuss or take forward. So the full version is here on a QR code, and it's designed. Also, we'd hope that other people will use it in their own live events or take forward the concept for their own organisations. So our agenda today. So we wanted to start by talking a little bit about inclusion at STM, kind of frame the reason we've focused on these guidelines. Then the event chair and session organizer guidelines are divided into three sections each. So Demeter is going to take the first three and Bill the second three, and then we'll be over to questions. So our D&I task and finish group started out by thinking about designing or starting to understand the baseline that STM is working from. So we looked at the number of people that are working in STM committees, in chapters, in task and finish groups, and we questionnaire them through a survey. And the results was this STM Diversity and Inclusion report, which we published in early 2025. And the QR code is here if you want to read more details. But the idea is this is the first step on our journey for D&I and ensuring that we repeat this survey going forward. So what we found out, headline results, that STM is largely led by women. It lacks representation from different kinds of communities, and that geographically we have, although comparatively higher representation from Asia, we lack regional diversity, particularly from areas like Africa, South America, Oceania. In terms of strengths, we see gender parity at senior levels shows progress, but in terms of gaps, we see that there's underrepresentation from Black, Latinx, LGBTQI communities, disabled and caregiving communities, and we recognise that there need to be stronger inclusion practices in leadership recruitment to ensure that that representation is seen there. Equally, we recognise we need to increase representation within our committees, and we need to review our event design, which is where we led to this project. Finally, the survey called for a commitment to change. So for STM to take a leadership role in embedding diversity as a foundation of responsible publishing. These are the four core pillars that the D&I Task and Finish group set out as critical for us to drive forward this work. So firstly, to focus on accountability. Secondly, to look at fostering belonging to an inclusive membership at STM. Third, to attract scholarly publishing talent. And fourthly, to influence the sector and wider society. But we recognise really what we're driving for are these outcomes, that the board's strategy should fully support DEIA, that we want to ensure we've got inclusion of international and marginalised communities. We want diverse event programmes, committees, new talent coming in. And we want scholarly publishing to be recognised for valuable diversity work. So the D&I Task and Finish group has finished its work, so the FN are finished, but actually this work will be picked up through an inclusion advisory group, which we're just finishing up the end of the recruitment process, and that group will start work and will report in to the board. So I'm now going to hand over to Demita, who's going to pick up the event chair and session organizer guidelines.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. I'm so pleased to be here. As was mentioned, STM is committed to advancing trusted research through inclusive practices. With more than 150 member organizations across nearly 20 countries, events must reflect the global diversity of STM members. The Task and Finish group was created to identify and address barriers to participation that still exist. Now, our goal today is to provide practical guidance you can apply directly to your event planning and facilitation. These guidelines were designed in part to address issues and concerns such as the current gaps in representation. I will share key priorities, core principles, and recommendations for assembling planning committees. These committees should reflect a range of skills, backgrounds, and geographic perspectives. I will also outline the inclusion goals we plan to achieve across all programming. With that foundation in place, let's begin by looking at the key priorities that will guide how we design and deliver more inclusive events. So when we talk about our key priorities, it really comes down to making the events more representative, more accountable, and more accessible. We are expanding our geographic reach to ensure stronger participations from regions that are a part of the global majority world, areas and individuals that have not been as present as they should or could be. We are also focused on strengthening sector-wide representation in our decision-making to be more reflective of the full publishing ecosystem. Accessibility is yet another key priority, so we're designing every experience with universal design principles as a part of the process. And finally, we're putting metrics in place so we can see what's working and where we may need to make improvements. Now that I've outlined the priorities, let's talk a bit about how we can put them into practice, starting with our approach to proactive inclusion. Building accessibility and inclusion into the content and experience from the very beginning is a necessary benefit, and we're committed to continuous improvement. These guidelines will evolve as we gather feedback, learn from the implementation, and incorporate emerging best practices. A key part of this approach is making sure that the people shaping these events reflect the diversity we want to see on stage and online. That work starts with our planning committees. We expect planning committees to be around 6 to 8 people, and real thought will be put into who will make up the team. We wish to bring in both large and small publishers, since their experiences and needs can be very different, and at least one person with knowledge of or experience with these guidelines we are sharing with you today. To keep things balanced, no single gender should make up more than about 60% of the group. Our goal is also to have a mix of career stages, so we get those fresh ideas as well as seasoned insight, because that combination leads to stronger, innovative, and more relevant sessions. We are very intentional about who plans our events. We're equally intentional about who speaks at them. Our lineup should reflect the full diversity of our community. We've determined that at least 15% of speakers should come from areas other than Europe and North America, with another 15% from small or independent publishers. We also aim for at least 15% of early career professionals to amplify new industry voices, and we're paying attention to intersectional representation. The program must be genuinely inclusive and not just a checklist. To help you meet these percentages, you can use STM's member network. You can partner with publishers in your area. You can also connect with people outside your usual network. And be sure to use the same evaluation methods for all speakers. One last thing to remember. Question if you are leaning into using the same speakers over and over. Bring in those new voices, check your own biases. And with that, I will turn it over to Bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamita. Can I just say I was really thrilled to see STM anchor on specific targets to help guide event chairs and planning people responsible for the planning. I think if anyone wants a double click on this, there was a really great article in the Lancet Global Health this month that speaks to what happens if we're not mindful of speaker and panelist representation and inclusion. So, like, couldn't recommend that more. When it comes to selecting speakers, I just want to double click a little bit on what Damiga was just talking through. Some of the best practices that the guidelines recommend around the selection process itself. And, first and foremost, I think it's really important to take a broad view in the search process. Associations, including STM, of course, but also regional publishing associations are a really terrific source of potential speakers who may not have otherwise gotten the exposure that their work suggests that they should. I think social networks are also a great way to kind of assess whether or not there is a speaker out there who fits what you're looking for in your session design. LinkedIn, Blue Sky, even some more consumer-oriented sources like Instagram or Facebook provide really fantastic visibility into prospective speakers' expertise. And for those who might post video clips of themselves speaking at prior events, give you a sense of how they might show up in front of a crowd. When you're evaluating, it's also really important to work to minimize and really ideally eliminate bias in the selection process. We recommend the guidelines recommend that before you start your search, putting together the selection and evaluation criteria you'll be using is really important. Calling out the expertise that you're looking for, the prior experiences you'd like to see, the presentation style you're envisioning for your program in advance of speaker selection. Creating that sort of evaluation framework helps you appraise speaker fit more objectively than, say, going on vibes alone. When relevant, when there are abstracts submitted to evaluate, for instance, or when you're working with a review panel, working to reduce and ideally eliminate bias in the process itself is equally as important. Anonymous reviews, for instance, or review panel diversities are two great approaches there and two of the recommended approaches that you'll see in the guidelines. And maybe my favorite of the guidelines work to eliminate and definitely start to question usual suspect syndrome, going back to the same people over and over again whenever speaking opportunities present themselves. I think not only is it important to bring fresh perspectives into industry-wide dialogue, but we should also be creating space for, previously untapped voices to help shape the conversation. Couple of other things to keep in mind that the guidelines call for supporting speakers who might be new or might be unfamiliar with the format. First-time speakers are going to be nervous. I think we all were when we started speaking at events. Help them. Offer membership, connect them with peers who they can learn from, describe the setup that they'll be speaking in so they can visualize it. Support first-time speakers in particular. Share the STM presenter inclusivity style guide. We'll touch on that in a couple of minutes. And if requested, if it's needed, if you can sense that it might be, contact STM to determine whether or not there are resources available to cover travel costs for speakers from, say, smaller organizations or from places where there might not be the travel flexibility, budget flexibility that some of us get in kind of larger organizations. I think it's also really important to offer flexible presentation formats where we can and where it makes sense. So if speakers are joining from a time zone and need to show up at, say, 3 a.m. To give a talk, maybe pre-record that. Or even if it's like time zone related, suboptimal 9 p.m., maybe pre-record portions of it so that, the energy can go into Q&A. And then the last kind of major pillar of recommendations in the selection process is to avoid tokenism. I hope this goes without saying, but diverse speakers shouldn't just talk about diversity. They should be given substantive topics in the agenda generally. It's important to balance across seniority levels and demographic groups, and diversity content shouldn't stand alone in separate tracks or sessions. It should be incorporated throughout the program. So you'll see those guidelines guidelines around speaker selection in the overarching guidelines. You'll also see on the same space in the STM website, the presenter inclusivity guide. We're gonna linger on that QR code for just 1 second. Maybe just jump back. Yeah, linger on that for just 1 second in case you, like me, are constantly losing your phone, just to give people a chance to kind of scan that and take them to the presenter inclusivity guide. But if you don't get this in time, or if you need to go back to it later, you can, of course, find it on the STM website. In the guide, you'll see a couple of things. Some tips on giving an accessible presentation, the approach that is recommended around text styling, font selection, color choice, images, charts, and tables. You'll see guidance around accessibility checking, and you'll see approaches to live captioning in PowerPoint. So things that make for a more inclusive, a more accessible presentation are outlined in that particular guide. And then the task and finish group who worked on this that Demia and I were part of, first, can I just say it was a blast. If you have an opportunity to work on an STM task and finish group, I couldn't recommend it more. The group did some really serious work and we're really proud of it. But it was a really engaging, fun, collaborative educational environment. That group laid out a timeline for implementation of these guidelines, and you'll see that we're just at the start of our pilot implementation phase. We're working to apply guidelines to STM's large-scale events and are targeting STM Frankfurt this autumn in the Northern Hemisphere um, for when those guidelines are fully applied. We're also in this pilot phase collecting baseline data from 2026 events. We're refining the measurement tools and we're developing additional support resources should they be needed based on any feedback. If you are on this call and you are a session chair or an event organizer and you have feedback, please share it. We'd be really grateful for anything, good, bad, otherwise, that might help us refine and reshape resources so that they are as practically useful to event organizers as possible. After Frankfurt, from November 2026 onward, we'll review a potential expansion of guidelines to smaller events and webinars, and STM will begin an annual review and refinement process to the guidelines themselves to make sure that they stay current. I think that's it for me. I'm handing things back over to Sarah, who's going to say a couple of things before taking us to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Bill and Demita. So finally, I just wanted to thank our task and finish group members and give them the credit for the work. It has been a substantial lift to do this work. I think the survey was much more took much more time than we had imagined, and clearly this work is going to be ongoing. But we do thank them for their work, and particularly Bill and Demita, who've led on the guidelines section of it. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the webinar for today, and we will move over to questions for the people in the room and stop recording.